have a question for you. What is something you were into that went viral? You see, we're talking about what's in first place. What did Jesus say is the most important thing in your life and in your faith? And I'm glad you're here today because we're talking about something that's super important. But I have this question for you before we get going, something I want you to think about. What is something that you were into that went viral? You know, that one thing that you really liked and it was popular, it was trendy, everyone's talking about it, you're posting about it on social media, and it's all over online. It's just like the thing, right? I remember when I was in middle school, more than anything, I wanted a pager. I wanted a beeper. I thought that would make me one of the cool kids. So I finally got one when I was in 7th grade. And it worked. Like, I was one of the popular kids because I had a pager. And I don't even know if you know what that is. It was before we had cell phones and all this stuff, and it was with payphones. It's this whole generational thing. But that's not the point. The point is that it was one of the popular things. And obviously, we don't have them anymore. It's just gone. And that's one thing I've noticed about things that go viral or things that are trendy. Like, they're really popular. Everyone's talking about them. They have value at the time, and then they're gone. It's kind of like the song Old Town Road, right? That was the song for a season of time. And then all of a sudden, it was gone. So things go viral pretty quickly. And then just as quickly, or if not even more quickly, they're gone. And we notice that these things that go viral, these things that are popular, they have a lot of value in that moment, right? If you happen to be collecting the same thing that everybody else is collecting, you pay a lot for those things. And they're worth a lot. But then as time goes by, sometimes those trends go away and that investment, they're just not worth the same amount of money anymore. And we see this, that things get popular and then very quickly they're not popular anymore. And unfortunately, I think we tend to see ourselves the same way, right? We do the same thing because when life is going great, people notice. And that makes us feel good. It makes us feel like we have value, right? You have the outfit, you have your style, maybe it's the hat and the shoes or whatever it is, or things are going really well at school or at home, or your relationships, there's no drama in your friend circle, all of those different things. And it feels great. And people notice and people comment, and you got like this little spring in your step as you're walking along, and you're just riding that high. But then the positive attention disappears, and the compliments disappear. And we don't really feel so great about ourselves anymore, right? Maybe we fail a class, or we mess up at work, or maybe our relationship starts to get a little more rocky, or the person we like doesn't like us back. Maybe there's some drama in your friend group, or something just goes wrong, and all of a sudden it just feels different, right? I think sometimes life can feel like I love roller coasters, but I don't like it when life feels like a roller coaster, right? So one of my favorite roller coasters is the Incredicoaster at Disneyland. And I love it when you're sitting there and it's just 3, 2, 1, and then it launches you and you go up the hill and you go through the tunnel and the Incredibles are there and everything's great. But then you come over the top of the hill and you have that big drop. And you just have that like sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. And I don't like it when you get that in life, right? But sometimes life just feels like a series of ups and we feel great and downs and we get that sinking feeling in the pit of our stomach. So the question is like, how do we avoid that? How do we get out of this never-ending cycle? Because it's dangerous when we find our value in the attention that we get from other people. It's dangerous when we find our value when we hang on to the compliments of other people. That's what creates that cycle. And we have to be really careful. We have to be careful that we don't find our value and see ourselves the way other people see us. And we're all tempted to do this. We're all tempted to feel more valuable when we get the words and the actions and the attentions from other people that support us. And then we feel less valuable when those things disappear. But that's not the way we're supposed to live. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, like we all know that. But what do we do about it? You know, it would be great if we could just find our value in God. Because he's the one who made us. He's the one who created us. He's the one who loves us more than we could possibly imagine. It would be amazing if we could put what God says about us in first place and just find our value there. And it sounds so simple. But then we actually have to get out and do it. And that's where things get tricky. Well, I have good news for us. Because we're not the only ones who have ever felt this way. Like for thousands of years, people have struggled with the same thing. And that's not the good news. But the good news is that 2,000 years ago, Jesus said something to the people back then that I think can help us now. You see, there was this guy named Luke 2,000 years ago, and he was a historian, and he did all this research and talked to eyewitnesses. And he wrote down a lot of the things that Jesus said and a lot of things that Jesus did. And one of the things that he wrote down is this conversation that Jesus had with this group of religious leaders. They were called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were upset with Jesus because Jesus would spend time with people that they thought didn't have much value. They thought Jesus should be hanging out with them, but instead Jesus is hanging out with people they considered sinners, like tax collectors and harlots and all of this. And they're like, Jesus, how could you possibly spend time with those people? And they're questioning his choice of friends. And what I love about the story is that Jesus responds with this parable, this illustration. You see, Jesus says one thing that changes everything. Jesus tells him a story. He says, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the other 99 in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And when he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. Now, I know this story is like a little out of context for me because I'm not a shepherd. I don't own any sheep and I don't even actually know anyone that owns sheep. But back in this culture, sheep were valuable and there were a lot of people who were shepherds. Sheep had value because you could trade them, you could sell them, you could use their wool for clothing and blankets and stuff like that. And so the more sheep you had, the more financial value you had in that society. But this guy who's a shepherd, he has 100 sheep. And one of them just goes and wanders off. And so he leaves the 99 sheep that were safe. He leaves them there in the wilderness and he goes to look for that one sheep. And the people listening to the story think this is kind of ridiculous because there's no way a shepherd would do that. Why would you leave your 99 sheep out in the wilderness? Why would you abandon them when there could be thieves and robbers and wild animals and you could come back and they could be gone or dead? Why would you leave them and go after this one? But the shepherd does that and he goes after this one sheep. And it gets even more crazy because when he finds this one sheep, he puts it on his shoulders and carries it all the way home. And when he gets home, he throws a party. And he invites all of his friends to come to this party. He's so excited. He has this giant celebration. And it seems ridiculous to the people that were there listening to this. But then Jesus gets to the punchline. In verse 7, he says, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. I love this because it shows how God feels about every single one of us. You see, there are billions and billions of people in this world. But if just one person comes back and decides to follow God, if they change their life, if they decide that they're going to believe that Jesus is who he says he is, and they're going to believe that Jesus can do what he says he will do, at that moment, when they put their faith in Jesus and they have the forgiveness of everything they've ever done wrong, and they become a child of God, at that moment, God throws a party in heaven that is far beyond anything that we could possibly imagine for the craziest party that we would ever throw. And think about that party. What would you do if you had unlimited resources? Like you could throw any party. Where would you have it? What would you eat? What would you do? Who would you invite? Everyone's going to say yes to come to this party. The biggest celebrities and people that you are fans of, they're all going to show up. What would that party look like? How long would it last? And this could be the party of the century that makes all the news articles and just gets all over the socials. You could go crazy thinking about a party like that. But it's nothing compared to the party that God throws in heaven over every single person, a person like you who decides to put their faith in Jesus. You see, and I love this story because what it shows me is how much value God has for me. This joy that God feels when a person decides to believe in him, it shows how valuable we are. And one person's life is just as valuable to God as that sheep was to the shepherd in the story that Jesus told. You see, no matter what you've done, no matter how far you've wandered from God, no matter how great your life is or how badly life hurts right now, no matter what people think about you, none of it ultimately matters. That's not where you find your value because you have value because of what God says about you. So here's what I want you to remember today. If you forget everything else, there's one thing I want you to remember. God determines your value. God determines your value. You see, we need to take what God says about us and put it in first place. And then we'll have confidence because we'll have self-worth and we'll have self-value. We'll begin to see ourselves the way that God sees us. You see, one day there was another Pharisee that came to Jesus, another religious leader. And he said, hey, what's the most important thing that God ever said? What's the most important command? What's the most important Bible verse? And Jesus was quick. He had the answer. In Matthew 22, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You see, Jesus said, here's what's most important. Love God, love others, and love yourself. You see, the greatest thing we can do in our faith is loving God and loving others. But we can't begin to do that until we see ourselves the way God sees us. We can't value others until we learn to value ourselves, and we can't love others until we learn to love ourselves. If we are going to fulfill the mission that God has given us in life, it has to begin with finding our value in God. So no matter what happens in life or what other people are thinking about you, whether it's at home or school or work or whatever it is, remember that God is the one who determines your value. So here's my challenge for you this week. What is one thing you can do to remind yourself of the way that God sees you? What is one thing you can do to remind yourself that God values you and loves you more than you could possibly imagine? I pray that this will stick in your mind this week and that you will have the confidence and the self-value and the self-worth that is built on what God says about you because you are his child and he loves you so much. Thanks, guys, and I pray you have a good week. We'll see you next time.